every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. A courtroom is supposed to be a sterile environment, a theater of logic where fact is separated from fiction by the sharp scalpels of evidence and reason. It is designed for solemnity, for the quiet, methodical pursuit of truth. But in January of 2013, Courtroom 5B in the Maricopa County Superior Courthouse was something else entirely. It was a television studio. The sterile air hummed with the electronic life of cameras, their unblinking red eyes capturing every flicker of emotion, every whispered objection, every tear. The proceedings were no longer confined to the wood-paneled walls. They were being broadcast live, piped directly into millions of living rooms across America. This wasn't just a trial. It was a season of television, and it had a star. Her name was Jodi Arias. On the witness stand, under the hot glare of the studio lights, she was a chameleon. One moment, she was a demure, soft-spoken victim, her voice cracking as she recounted tales of abuse. The next, she was a defiant combatant, locking horns with a prosecutor who portrayed her as a modern-day femme fatale. For 18 days, she held the stand, and a nation watched, captivated. They weren't just watching a defendant testify, they were watching a performance. They debated her sincerity on social media, dissected her body language on cable news panels, and chose sides as if it were a sporting event. Lost in the spectacle, almost an afterthought, was the man whose violent death had made all of this possible. Travis Alexander. His life, his character, and his final terrifying moments were reduced to plot points in a narrative that his killer was now attempting to direct. Today, on Anatomy of Crime, we dissect the anatomy of a media trial. We will examine the case of Jodi Arias, not just as a story of a toxic relationship that spiraled into brutal violence, but as a landmark cultural event. We will explore how the convergence of a salacious crime, a manipulative defendant, and the insatiable appetite of 24-hour news transformed the justice system into public entertainment. This is the story of how a private tragedy was meticulously repackaged and sold to the world, and how the woman at its center used the very platform meant to ensure her conviction in a brazen attempt to control the narrative of the man she had already silenced forever. To understand the spectacle, we must first understand the players, and to understand them, we must go back to a time before the cameras, before the lawyers, before the blood. Travis Alexander was a man built on forward momentum. Born in Southern California, his childhood was fractured, marked by the loss of his father and the subsequent challenges his mother faced. He and his siblings were ultimately raised by their paternal grandmother, a period of stability that seemed to instill in him a profound drive to create a different, more successful life for himself. He found a powerful framework for that ambition in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He converted to Mormonism in his early 20s, and he embraced it with the full force of his charismatic personality. The faith provided him with a community and a moral compass, but it also presented a series of profound internal conflicts. Travis was a handsome, dynamic, and successful motivational speaker and salesman for a company called Prepaid Legal Services, or PPL. He traveled the country, inspiring others with his story of overcoming adversity. He was social, he was well-liked, and he was attractive to women. Yet, his faith prescribed a strict code of conduct, one that demanded chastity before marriage and held the sacredness of a temple marriage as its highest ideal. This created a powerful tension within him, the chasm between the man he was in public, the devout Mormon leader, and the private man who struggled with the same desires and temptations as anyone else. This internal conflict would become a central, tragic theme in the story of his death, a vulnerability that would be cruelly exploited long after he was gone. Into this world of ambition and conflict walked Jodi Arias. On the surface, she seemed to be everything Travis was looking for. She was a fellow Californian, an aspiring photographer with a bright smile and an engaging personality. They met in September 2006 at a PPL conference in Las Vegas. The perfect setting for a story that would become defined by artifice and illusion. The connection was immediate and electric. Travis was captivated by her, and she in turn appeared captivated by his world. Within months, she was baptized into the Mormon Church, a gesture of immense significance that signaled, at least to Travis, a shared commitment to a future built on faith. Their relationship was a whirlwind of long-distance communication. Thousands of text messages, emails, and phone calls formed the tissue of their connection, creating an intense, almost hermetically sealed world of private jokes, spiritual discussions, and deeply intimate confessions. It was a relationship that was both deeply spiritual and intensely physical. They prayed together and studied scriptures, but they also engaged in a sexual relationship that directly violated the tenets of their shared religion. This duality was the engine of their dynamic. It created a bond of shared transgression, a secret world that was thrilling and binding. For Travis, it likely amplified his internal guilt, a cycle of sin and repentance. For Jodi, however, it seemed to represent something else entirely. Her conversion to Mormonism, like many things in her life, appeared to be less about genuine faith and more about adapting her identity to secure her position in Travis's life. She was a mirror, reflecting back the image of the perfect partner he wanted to see. But the problem with mirrors is that they can crack, and behind the reflection, a very different image was waiting. The official romantic part of their relationship lasted only 5 months, ending in June of 2007. For Travis, this was a necessary step. The relationship's intensity and its inherent conflict with his religious goals made it unsustainable. He wanted to find a woman he could marry in the temple, and he knew, on some level, that Jodi was not that woman. He tried to frame the breakup as a transition into friendship, a common and often painful dance of de-escalation. But for Jodi Arias, the end of the romance was not an end at all. It was merely a change in tactics. She refused to be relegated to the past. Shortly after the breakup, she made a life-altering decision. She packed her bags and moved from her home in California to Mesa, Arizona, just a short drive from Travis's house. This move marked the beginning of a new, far more sinister phase. Her presence was no longer a welcome, long-distance voice. It was a constant, physical reality. She inserted herself into his life with a quiet insistence that slowly morphed into unnerving obsession. Travis would come home to find her on his doorstep. He discovered she had accessed his email account and was reading his private correspondence. She had even managed to get the password to his Facebook profile, monitoring his interactions with other women. The jealousy was a constant, simmering threat. On one occasion, his tires were slashed. He suspected it was Jodi, but he couldn't prove it. She would show up when he was on dates with other women, a spectral presence reminding him of her existence. His friends saw it clearly. They warned him about her. They called her a stalker. They recognized the red flags of obsessive behavior that Travis himself, perhaps blinded by a mixture of residual affection, pity and guilt, seemed unable or unwilling to fully acknowledge. He was caught in a toxic web. He would push her away, demanding she respect his boundaries, only to pull her back in for moments of intimacy. He was, in his own way, using her, and she was using his vacillation as an excuse to remain tethered to him. This was not a relationship of equals. It was a slow, creeping siege. Jodi Arias was not letting go. She was methodically dismantling the walls of his private life, ensuring that even if she couldn't have him, no one else would either. This wasn't love, it was a blueprint for disaster, and the final, terrible act was drawing closer. By the spring of 2008, Travis Alexander was actively trying to disentangle himself from Jodi Arias for good. He was making plans for the future, a future that emphatically did not include her. He had planned a company retreat to Cancun, Mexico, and he had invited another woman, a fellow Mormon named Mimi Hall, to join him. This was a significant step, a clear signal that he was moving on. Jodi, however, was not one to be written out of the script. In late May, she learned of the Cancun trip and of Mimi Hall. To the obsessive mind, this was not a rejection, it was a challenge, and she responded with a plan of chilling premeditation. She told her friends she was embarking on a road trip to visit a male friend in Utah named Ryan Burns. The trip was real, but it was also a cover story, a carefully constructed alibi for the real destination she had in mind. On June 2, 2008, she rented a car from Redding, California. She specifically asked for a car that was not red, white, or blue, hoping for a more inconspicuous color. She also, at some point, removed the front license plate and placed it in the trunk, along with the rear plate, which she flipped upside down. A clumsy but clear attempt to evade detection by traffic cameras. She also brought with her several gas cans. The purpose was simple and sinister: to refuel without leaving a paper trail of credit card receipts that could place her on a specific route at a specific time. Her journey was not a straight line from California to Utah. It was a secret southbound detour, a pilgrimage of rage aimed directly at Mesa, Arizona. On June 4th, she arrived at Travis Alexander's home. The events that unfolded inside that house are known to us primarily through a single, crucial piece of evidence: a digital camera. Travis was an amateur photographer, and he and Jodi often took pictures, many of them intimate. That afternoon was no different. The camera's memory card would later reveal a timeline of his final hours. It begins with photos of Jodi, fully clothed, in sexually suggestive poses. Then, a series of nude photographs of both of them. At 5:29 p.m., the camera captures an image of Travis Alexander in the shower. He is alive, seemingly unaware of the danger he is in. It is the last picture ever taken of him. What happened in the moments that followed was an explosion of violence so extreme it shocked even seasoned investigators. The evidence at the scene told a story of a frantic, desperate struggle. Travis was attacked in the shower. He was stabbed 29 times. Many of the wounds were to his back, but he also had significant defensive wounds on his hands, indicating he fought desperately for his life. In the midst of this frenzied knife attack, his throat was slit from ear to ear, so deeply that it severed his trachea and carotid artery. As if this brutality were not enough, he was also shot in the head with a .25 caliber pistol. The forensic evidence suggested the gunshot may have been the final act, a cold-blooded period at the end of a sentence written in rage. During this struggle, another photograph was taken. It is a blurry, disorienting image captured at 5:32 p.m. just minutes after the shower photo. It shows a view of the ceiling, but at the bottom of the frame is a pair of stockinged feet and the hem of a pair of pants, dragging what is clearly Travis's bleeding body across the beige carpet. It was an accidental photograph, a ghost in the machine, captured when the camera was likely dropped or jostled during the horrific aftermath. After killing Travis, Jodi set about cleaning the scene. She attempted to remove evidence, and most critically, she took the camera, deleted the incriminating photos, and threw it into the washing machine along with the bedding. Her work done, she left Travis Alexander's body in the shower of his master bathroom, locked the door, and drove away, continuing her journey north to Utah. 5 days passed. Travis's friends grew increasingly worried when he missed a scheduled work call, and then failed to show up for his flight to Cancun. On June 9th, a group of them went to his home to check on him. After finding the doors locked and getting no response, they entered through an unlocked dog door. Inside, they found a house that was eerily quiet. They checked the rooms and eventually made their way to the master bedroom. The door was locked. When they forced it open, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. They found their friend, Travis, decomposing in the shower stall, surrounded by the dark, dried evidence of the violence that had ended his life. The first call to 911 was a frantic, grief-stricken cry for help, the opening bell for an investigation that would soon captivate the world. The Mesa Police Department arrived at a crime scene that was both chaotic and strangely sanitized. The sheer brutality of the murder suggested a crime of passion, an act of personal rage. The victim's close friends immediately pointed the finger at one person, Jodi Arias. They recounted her history of stalking, her jealousy, her bizarre behavior. She was, from the very beginning, the prime suspect. Investigators quickly found her contact information and called her. Jodi played the part of a concerned, heartbroken friend. She told them she hadn't seen Travis in months and had no idea what could have happened. She had an alibi. She was on a road trip to Utah. Her story was consistent, but detectives were suspicious. The first major break in the case came from the scene itself. Tucked away in the washing machine, investigators found the digital camera. At first, it seemed like a dead end. The camera was damaged, and a cursory look showed the most recent photos had been deleted. But Detective Esteban Flores, a digital forensics expert with the Mesa Police, knew that deleted rarely means gone forever. He meticulously worked to recover the data from the camera's memory card. What he found was the equivalent of a signed confession. He resurrected the deleted images, and they laid out the timeline of the murder with chilling precision. There were the explicit photos of Jodi and Travis, placing them together intimately on the day of the murder. There was the haunting final photo of Travis in the shower, alive and vulnerable. And then there was the jackpot. The accidental slip-up photo, the blurry image from the floor, showing a figure dragging Travis's body. Though the person's face wasn't visible, the image was time-stamped just minutes after the shower photo, irrefutably proving the photographer was present during or immediately after the murder. Investigators also recovered a photo of Jodi from earlier that day, showing her with dark hair. This seemed insignificant until they learned that by the time she was interviewed by police, she had dyed her hair blonde, a classic sign of someone trying to alter their appearance. The camera was the smoking gun, the digital ghost that Arias had failed to exorcise. Investigators also began to piece together her movements. They found a receipt from a gas station in California where she had filled up her rental car and her extra gas cans, using the mileage on the rental car when she returned it. they could calculate that she had driven far more miles than a direct trip from California to Utah would require. Enough extra miles for a round trip to Mesa. The lies were beginning to unravel. Armed with this overwhelming evidence, police arrested Jodi Arias at her grandparents' home in California on July 15, 2008. In custody, her story began to change. Her initial alibi, that she was nowhere near Mesa, had been shattered by the camera. So she constructed a new one. In a lengthy, tearful interrogation, she spun a fantastical tale for investigators. Yes, she admitted, she had been at Travis's house on June 4th. But they were attacked. She claimed 2 intruders, a man and a woman, broke into the house. She said they were dressed in black ski masks. In her telling, the man shot Travis, and the woman began stabbing him. She claimed she was able to escape and, fearing for her life, drove into the desert, too terrified to call the police. She insisted the intruders were the ones who killed Travis, and she was just a lucky survivor. This intruder story was a work of fiction, and a poorly constructed one at that. It defied logic and contradicted every piece of physical evidence. There was no sign of forced entry. No foreign DNA from any unidentified intruders was found at the scene, and most damningly, the camera told a story of intimacy, not a home invasion. The timeline simply didn't allow for her elaborate tale. For investigators and prosecutors, it was just another lie from a woman who seemed pathologically incapable of telling the truth. They were confident they had their killer. What they didn't know was that Jodi Arias was just getting started. Her third and most audacious story was yet to come, and she was saving it for the biggest stage imaginable. The trial of Jodi Arias began on January 2, 2013 in Phoenix, Arizona. From day one, it was clear this would be no ordinary legal proceeding. Citing the public's right to know, Judge Sherry Stevens had made a fateful decision. She would allow television cameras to broadcast the trial, live and unedited. In the era of 24-hour cable news and the burgeoning power of social media, this decision acted like an accelerant on a fire. Networks like HLN, then known as Headline News, dedicated their entire broadcast day to what became known as gavel-to-gavel coverage. The trial was no longer just a local court case. It was a national obsession, a real-life soap opera with a new episode every weekday. The prosecution, led by the fiery and relentless Deputy County Attorney Juan Martinez, presented a simple, powerful narrative. Jodi Arias, he argued, was a woman scorned. Driven by jealousy over Travis's new relationship, she meticulously planned his murder, drove to Arizona, seduced him one last time, and then butchered him in a fit of rage. Martinez's style was pure theater. He was aggressive, often sarcastic, and he hammered Arias and her inconsistencies with a relentless tempo. He presented the forensic evidence piece by piece. The recovered photos from the camera, the mileage on the rental car, the changing hair color, the .25 caliber casing found at the scene which matched a gun Jodi's grandparents reported stolen from their home. A gun of the exact same caliber. His case was methodical and damning. He painted a picture of a cold, manipulative liar who had murdered Travis in cold blood. The defense, led by attorneys Kirk Nurmi and Jennifer Wilmot, faced a monumental challenge. The physical evidence tying their client to the scene was irrefutable. The intruder story was patently absurd and had already been abandoned. So, they were left with only one viable strategy: to pivot to a claim of self-defense. This required a complete and total reinvention of the narrative. Jodi Arias was no longer a liar or a killer. She was a victim. and Travis Alexander was no longer a victim. He was a monster. This was the third and final version of Jodi's story, and it was the most audacious one yet. To sell this narrative, the defense had to put Jodi Arias on the witness stand. It was a massive gamble, but it was their only play. For an astonishing 18 days, Jodi testified. She presented a meticulously detailed, albeit completely uncorroborated account of her relationship with Travis. She claimed that behind his public persona as a devout Mormon, he was a physically abusive, sexually deviant sadist. She alleged he had secret pedophilic tendencies. She described a life of constant emotional and physical abuse, portraying herself as a woman living in terror. She claimed that on June 4, 2008, their final encounter had turned violent. According to her testimony, after they took the photos, Travis became enraged, body slamming her to the ground. She said she ran into his closet to escape, found his gun on a top shelf, and fired it in a moment of panic as he charged at her. She claimed to have no memory of the stabbing or slitting his throat, attributing the memory loss to the extreme trauma of the event. Her performance on the stand was a masterclass in manipulation. She cried. She spoke in a soft, little girl voice. She offered up graphic and salacious details of her sex life with Travis, all designed to shock, titillate, and ultimately persuade the jury of her victimhood. She was, in effect, putting Travis Alexander on trial for his own murder. Because he was not there to defend himself, to rebut these claims, her accusations hung in the air, broadcast to millions. The strategy was clear. If they could not exonerate Jodi, they could at least tarnish Travis's character so thoroughly that a jury might believe she had a reason to be afraid, a reason to kill. The cross-examination by Juan Martinez was the stuff of legal legend and television drama. For days, he relentlessly grilled her, exposing the glaring inconsistencies between her new story and the mountain of lies she had told before. He would read her own romantic journal entries back to her, contrasting her loving words with her current claims of abuse. He forced her to admit, lie by lie, that she had deceived police, her friends, her family, and the media. "So you've had a few memory problems in this case, haven't you, ma'am?" he would ask with dripping sarcasm. Their exchanges were electric, a battle of wills between a pit bull prosecutor and a defendant who refused to be broken. Every moment was captured by the cameras, analyzed by cable news pundits, and debated endlessly online. The public's response was unprecedented. The trial became a cultural phenomenon, complete with its own ecosystem of celebrity commentators, online sleuths, and fervent fan bases. People created Team Jodi and Team Travis social media pages. They waited outside the courthouse for a chance to get one of the few public seats, hoping to catch a glimpse of the real-life drama. The trial's key players became household names. Nancy Grace, host of a popular show on HLN, became a de facto prosecutor for the television audience, passionately arguing for Arias's guilt each night. The trial transcended the courtroom. It became a commodity. It was a story about sex, lies, religion, and murder. A perfectly potent cocktail for a media landscape hungry for content. The search for justice was now hopelessly entangled with the pursuit of ratings. The defense's strategy was as much about playing to the cameras and the public as it was about convincing the 12 people in the jury box. They presented expert witnesses who diagnosed Arias with PTSD and battered woman syndrome, providing a clinical framework for her claims of abuse and memory loss. They introduced a secretly recorded phone call in which Travis spoke in a sexually explicit and degrading manner, presenting it as proof of his dark side. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, was designed to create doubt, to muddy the waters, to suggest that the real Jodi Arias was the terrified victim on the stand, not the cold-blooded killer the prosecution described. But with every new detail, the spectacle grew, and the memory of Travis Alexander, the actual victim in the case, faded further into the background, his character posthumously assassinated on a global stage. The trial had taken on a life of its own, and its primary function was no longer just to determine guilt or innocence, but to feed the public's insatiable appetite for the story. On May 8, 2013, after more than 4 months of testimony, the jury delivered its verdict. They found Jodi Arias guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict confirmed that the jury had seen through her performance, rejecting the self-defense narrative in favor of the prosecution's claim of a premeditated, calculated killing. The next phase was to determine her sentence: life in prison or the death penalty. The same jury that convicted her was tasked with this decision. After deliberating, they were unable to reach a unanimous agreement, resulting in a hung jury on the sentencing. Under Arizona law, this meant a new jury had to be impaneled for a second penalty phase, solely to decide her fate. This second trial, in late 2014 and early 2015, was another media event, though slightly more subdued, as the judge limited some of the live coverage. The defense again argued for mercy, painting a picture of a mentally ill woman, while the prosecution reiterated the brutal nature of the crime. Once again, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision. This second deadlock legally removed the death penalty as an option. In April 2015, nearly 7 years after she murdered Travis Alexander, Judge Sherry Stevens sentenced Jodi Arias to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The legal saga was over, but the legacy of the case was just beginning. We set out today to dissect the anatomy of a media trial, and the Arias case provides the ultimate specimen. It demonstrated how the modern media landscape can fundamentally alter the texture of the justice system. The trial's defining characteristic was not a piece of forensic evidence or a brilliant legal maneuver, but its status as a public spectacle. The constant, unfiltered television coverage created a feedback loop. The lawyers and even Arias herself began playing to the cameras, knowing their audience extended far beyond the jury. The public, in turn, felt an unprecedented sense of ownership over the case, becoming armchair jurors who delivered their own verdicts on Twitter and Facebook. What makes this case a landmark is how it exposed the perilous intersection of justice and entertainment. The search for truth in the courtroom was often overshadowed by the network's need for compelling television. Complex issues of domestic violence, mental health, and legal ethics were flattened into simplistic, digestible narratives: good versus evil, victim versus villain. And at the center of it all was Jodi Arias, a defendant who understood the power of the camera better than anyone. She used her 18 days on the stand as an audition, a platform to broadcast her version of reality to the world, attempting to salvage her image even as her freedom slipped away. In the end, Travis Alexander's family received a measure of legal justice. His killer would spend the rest of her life in prison, but they were forced to endure a second public violation. They had to watch as the man they loved was systematically slandered on a global stage, his most private moments turned into fodder for cable news debates. The trial of Jodi Arias serves as a stark and enduring cautionary tale. It reveals that in the modern age, even the most profound of human tragedies, the violent end of a life, is not immune from being commodified, packaged and sold as just another story. Travis Alexander was murdered once in his home, but his memory and character were killed 1,000 more times, every day, under the relentless glare of the television lights. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.